Okay, welcome back. It's been a while since I last made a video. There's maybe a handful at the very most up on the channel now on YouTube. The other channel's not so successful yet. We're just still sticking with this one on YouTube, and then we'll see how we get on. Why was it for at least 6 weeks since the last video? Um, I was juggling lots of writing projects, um, but I did have the idea for this video a while back, and a lot of my decisions for videos these days are to do with the fact that I'll be leaving here in August. So what I want to do in the next few weeks before I go is to present the present some talks on a lot of projects that I need my books for, because I'm not going to be traveling with a lot of books. So all the videos that require multiple readings from large numbers of books, I want to get out of the way. The two main talks that I wanted to focus on was this one, which is going to be on Marina Tsvetaeva, the Russian poet, 20th century. I did have an idea to do a general Russian poetry talk, which I will do at some point as well, but I thought maybe I'd just focus on Tsvetaeva today. And then the second one will be a kind of my personal survey of British and Irish poetry for the 20th century. I think these things need to be gotten out of the way, because not just because of the book problem, but it will give you some standpoint on the recent past and the way I interpret poetry for the last, say, 100 years or so. So that's like a big task, and it will cross 2, 3, 4 videos. Like I say, I'll do a general one on Russian poetry, and I will probably include some Tsvetaeva in the general Russian poetry talk. The British poetry one will include Irish poets as well. Tricky to know what to do with that. I'm gonna try to present some less well-known poets as well. That's kind of how I see the function of it, because there's so much already been said about 20th century British poetry, probably, and there's lots of books out there, so I don't want it to be too much of a mainstream angle on that. Anyway, let's just get into Tsvetaeva for today, and I'll try to make a video a week minimum for the next little while, and like I say, focus on all of these books that I want to read from. As I said in one of the previous videos, I may well be violating copyright on some of this stuff, but I hope that it won't cause anybody too many problems, and you can buy a few books if you like what I'm talking about. Today is going to include a lot of different texts, and I've got a pile of books here which I'll show you. So we're going to do a general introduction to Tsvetaeva, and then through a couple of readings from some book introductions, and then I will go through the text, the books that I have, the translations that I have. I have multiple translations of same texts in some cases. So let's get stuck in. I think, and then obviously at the end I will give you a summary and my personal kind of take on Tsvetaeva. I've actually rehearsed this talk already, and the file went poof and disappeared. So this is kind of a second go in a way, but it's kind of good, because there were some problems with that video, and I want to structure it a little bit differently. Okay, Tsvetaeva. I got two books here which I'll show you to begin with. not very good at placing these things in the camera. Okay, that's a Nina Kosman translation from the, I think it's 80s, 90s. Most of the good translations of Tsvetaeva in English tend to be coming out in the 80s and 90s, at least to my mind. There's also Elaine Feinstein is very important translator of Tsvetaeva, and probably her translations were most well known in Britain when Tsvetaeva was kind of building up speed in terms of people's recognition of her as a great poet. In the previous rehearsal video, I made the bold claim that Tsvetaeva was the best poet of the 20th century in any language. After having 24 hours reflecting on it, I am not sure if I could say that totally, but she's possibly my personal favourite. It's a tricky topic because she's writing in Russian. Russian to English translation is full of difficulties. It's not translating from a Romance language, a European language. So that's an even more bold claim, maybe. I don't know if I'm overstating it, but she's incredibly important to me. I do think she's the best of the big 3 or 4 Russian poets that get spoken about from the 20th century. So the others would be Akhmatova, Mandelstam, and then Mayakovsky, possibly. I have problems with Mayakovsky ideologically, but I'll talk about that a little bit later. So let's just do a general introduction. The other book that I'm going to name check at the beginning is this book, The Essential Poetry. This is a much newer translation, and it's by Michael M. Naydan, I think it's pronounced, and Slava Yastremsky. And this one came out in 2015, so it's much newer, and in fact that is probably going to be the book that I would recommend if you're not familiar with Tsvetaeva. Some apologies to Elaine Feinstein because I only have some of her translations downstairs. I don't read them that much, but she was a good intro to Tsvetaeva. But I just think that this team, Naydan and Yastremsky, are really good. And this is just a good volume if you've never touched this poetry before. I'll go back to the Kosman because I think it gives you more of a biography. You're just going to need maybe 5-10 minutes of an introduction, I would imagine, if you don't know Tsvetaeva. Okay, so this is Kosman, I think. No, sorry, Laura Weeks. It's Kosman's translation. Laura Weeks is introducing the book. This is also a good volume, by the way, and if you're into Russian poetry, this publisher are great. They're called Ardis, and they have that stock design for all of their books, so you can notice them easily. Ardis are great. I don't know how well they're doing these days. I don't know what kind of interest there is in Russian writing, but I love them anyway. Okay, so intro to Marina Tsvetaeva. I'll just read a few pages of this introduction, jump in and out to give you a picture of her. Marina Tsvetaeva is widely acclaimed as one of the great Russian poets of the 20th century. Her path to fame, however, was not the meteor's or comet's path she once claimed for all poets, but more that of the biblical measure of leaven, which lay hidden until the bread suddenly doubled in size. At the time of her rediscovery in the 1960s, she was the property of a privileged few, small scattered groups of scholars and poetry lovers who were acquainted with a fraction of her total work, and a biography full of palpable gaps. In the 80s, the gaps in her biography were filled in, the amount of available material doubled, and so did her audience. At this time, she was firmly re-established in her native land, and emerged on the world stage as well, thanks to translations of her poetry into English, French, Italian, and German. That's just a little précis. It's worth noting, I don't know if she goes into the biographical detail. So Tsvetaeva was born at the end of the 19th century, and she's kind of hitting adulthood in the 19 teens. And she starts publishing quite early. This is just the major poems and some selected lyrics. The present volume, compiled and translated by Nina Kosman, is unique in that it combines examples of two very different genres, the short lyric poem and the long quasi-narrative poem, or poema. Poema I'm going to refer to again later on, and possibly read one of the big three poema that Tsvetaeva wrote. Poema is a genre unique to Russian literature. Actually, you do hear that word in Italian as well. I think it's the same word. So I'm not sure how true that claim is, but obviously in Italian it would maybe have different qualities to it. A brief comparison of the lyric poem and the poema is in order. First, because English-speaking readers who are already acquainted with Tsvetaeva's lyric poetry may be less familiar with her mastery of the longer genre, and secondly, because her poemi are notoriously difficult to grasp. Part of the difficulty lies in their length. Although the original epic, heroic subject matter has long disappeared from the poema, the reader still has to contend with its greater length. For the poet, the poema's length translates into the question of sustained creativity. Tsvetaeva once wrote to her Czech friend and benefactress Anna Teskova that only a master could produce a poema, because a single lyrical impulse might yield a stanza or at most a block of 10 to 12 lines in finished form. Yet for Tsvetaeva, who was, in Boris Pasternak's words, an extraordinarily deep-chested singer, one who does not run out of breath over very long phrases, sustaining the lyrical moment does not seem to have presented a challenge. It was the gaps between the lyrical bursts that she feared. As she wrote to Pasternak, lyric poems are separate moments of one movement, a movement in segments. A lyric is a dotted line. From afar it looks solid, black, but if you look closely it's all in the gaps between the dots, airless space, death. And you die from poem to poem. In a book, a novel, a poema, even an article, this is not so. They have their own rules. A book doesn't want to discard its author, the people, fates, souls about which you write want to live, and they want to live further, each day more. They don't want to end. That's from a letter in 1923. Incidentally, that's another book I don't have with me. Rilke, Tsvetaeva, Boris Pasternak. There's a wonderful book, particularly useful if you're starting out writing. It's a bunch of letters between those three poets from the 20s. I think this is quoted from that book as well. It's awesome. I think it's just called Letters 1923 or something like that. You might want to look it up. Pursuing the distinction between Tsvetaeva's short lyric poems and her poemi, Olga Peters Hasty concludes that it lies in the relationship of the part to the whole. The short lyrics point both forward and backward to the poems that flank them chronologically. The poema points inward to its own internal centre of gravity. To borrow a figure from Tsvetaeva's own Poets with a History and Poets Without a History, the one is an arrow loosed into infinity, the other a closed circle. Because of the poemi's more obvious sense of closure, Hasty refers to them as the stones around which the stream of Tsvetaeva's lyric verse flows. Thus, from the point of view of their creator, the poemi are at once more difficult and more satisfying than the short lyric poem. They have a longer life. See above, they don't want to end, and they have the ability to heal the wound or gap between each short lyric and the next. Okay, I'm not going to go into that too much. I'll come back to that book. That just gives you a sense of the two main genres that she's working in, the lyric and the poema, or the longer poem. Um, this is the poet Tess Gallagher's take on Tsvetaeva. I didn't actually know she was a lover of Tsvetaeva, but she's written an introduction to this book. I'm not sure if I'm going to read all the introduction, but just might be good to have another poet's version of Tsvetaeva. Let me get this right. Yeah. The title of the intro is called Translating the Fine Excess of Spirit in Marina Tsvetaeva. It's a somewhat ambiguous title because I don't think Gallagher herself has translated Tsvetaeva. She's just referring to the translators in this volume. Marina Tsvetaeva holds a very special place in my memory of the search for women writers who might offer examples of what to admire and to which we might aspire. The early 1970s female models for young women poets like myself, as we began to form our poetic voices, were either hermetic, such as Emily Dickinson, who was shuttered away with her bounty hidden in mason jars because her genius had been thwarted by male publishing predilections, or at the other end of the scale, the explosive cauldron of pent-up righteous anger and truth-telling of Sylvia Plath and Anne Sexton, for which one was grateful while feeling guiltily that one had perhaps been ritually saved by their suicides from similar psychic trauma. Just my commentary on this, actually. I did mention Sylvia Plath in relation to Tsvetaeva in my little rehearsal video. Plath is somebody I don't read much anymore, and I think for an English-speaking writer, somebody who's interested in poetry, there are kind of immediate links to kind of Sexton and Plath, neither of which I think are great poets, passable poets, maybe at best. I do like certain of Plath's poems, but very selectively. So that's a little bit of a problem for me. Also, the woman poet situation that she's speaking of, I also have problems with, because you get a lot of women poets, shunning women's anthologies and stuff like that. I think, for example, Elizabeth Bishop's one of them. But anyway, Gallagher's possibly more inclined to kind of, I guess you would be looking for poetry out of your own gender in some sense. So it's probably nothing uber feminist or anything. When translations by Stanley Kunitz and others of Tsvetaeva's contemporary luminary Anna Akhmatova began to be published, I consequently felt myself drinking deeply of the latter's gravitas, a kind of dignity and regal purity, a seemingly uncrushable spirit, a poet who, while representing the weight of oppression of those times under Stalin, had managed to become a fortress unto herself, yet who would come to embody that time. But Marina Tsvetaeva was another equally powerful and compelling voice emerging from Russia. I truly believe that Kunitz, an excellent translator of Akhmatova and who eventually became my mentor after I wrote thanking him for those poems, was really thinking of Tsvetaeva's influence on me when he referred to my work as possessing a fine excess of spirit. Akhmatova held her truths close to the bone, so we were able to suck the marrow of those cold Russian realities. But Tsvetaeva's spirit could not articulate or survive without soaring. That's a good way of kind of delineating those two poets for me. I do think, like I say, Tsvetaeva is the greater poet. Anyway, let's get on with it. In my early readings of Tsvetaeva, it is precisely this excess, this sense that life is at once abundant and dire, that attracted me. And further, that at life's bleakest moments one might be lifted by love and language into something surpassing the merely mortal. These new, rangier, emotionally freighted translations of Tsvetaeva by Michael Naydan and Slava Yastremsky, the latter a native Russian speaker and professor at Bucknell University, and the former a professor and translator at Penn State University, who have translated Russian prose and poetry for the past 40 years, make these qualities much more strongly available to me. Across the translations of Akhmatova, there still remains only one Akhmatova for me, but with Tsvetaeva there exist many Tsvetaevas, and these further inflections are worth discovering in this considerable accomplishment. The truth of this multiplicity of Tsvetaevas was brought strongly home to me when I was fortunate enough to attend a marvellous programme presented in Dublin of Tsvetaeva's work translated into Irish. The translator herself, Darena Nikaneda, I might get her name wrong, pronunciation wrong, gave an unforgettable voicing of these poems against the excellent English translations read commendingly by their creator, Elaine Feinstein. Next to the English emerged this Irish spitfire Tsvetaeva, who was guttural and utterly tenacious, imperial even. Her language in Irish, a spiritual spiralling to a pinnacle, carried us into the vastness of Tsvetaeva's imagination, which is always a feeling of going towards something as much as it is a rendering of what one could actually possess. And that reminds me, I would like to pick up those Irish translations. I don't speak Irish, but I have studied a little Irish. But as you can tell, my pronunciation is pretty awful. These translations offered by Naydan and Yastremsky seem to closely accompany the Tsvetaeva who really wants to love like the gods, not like a mere human being. That's another important statement. I think I was thinking of Walt Whitman actually the other day, because I've been going back to him, and I noticed that he's something of a materialist, really. I mean, he's addressing men, he's addressing men and women, he's addressing mankind. Tsvetaeva actually has a phrase in one of her poems saying, these poems are not written for men, they're written for God, and there's an essential difference there. And as we'll get into the readings of the poems, she also has like this massive feeling for mythology, and particularly Greek mythology. So the gods are very close to her. She changes the entire scale of our expectation of how one loves and whom one loves. For her personally, this became a recipe for loss, since it was not easy to find lovers who could soar with her. And of course those heights could not be maintained, even when she chose poets as love mates, whether actualized, such as her early female lover Sophia Panok, or kindred in spirit, Blok, Rilke, Akhmatova, or somewhere in between, Mandelstam and Pasternak. I'm going to do a video on Blok as well. That's another story. But yeah, that's her relationship to the other Russians. What I became more aware of while reading these translations is how Tsvetaeva uses her poetry to regain her emotional balance. Instead of cutting a lover off for leaving her or becoming the victim, she turns the tables on them and lets them feel what they have lost in abandoning their love of her. This was a newly articulated paradigm for women poets all over the world, trying to do more than lick wounds in the stance of a victim. In placing Tsvetaeva's appeal to American contemporary poetry of the present and myself in the 1970s, I believe she has been the more dangerous and unwieldy model when compared to Akhmatova, who became so important to us as a sign of stature under political and emotional duress, attracting translators such as Jane Kenyon, whose own work was greatly emboldened by Akhmatova. Oh, sorry, hold on. Sorry, let's get back to this. For all the possible range of voices open to women poets, what still claims central respect in the American canon and critical arena, truncated as that apparatus may be, seems fairly reeled in selves in chiaroscuro, emotional cargoes held close to the chest. We seem to have a kind of cool hand Luke censor built into both female and male engendered poetry, but especially operative toward poetry written by women. When one reads Tsvetaeva in Naydan and Yastremsky's translations, I find something restored to her that I had deeply sensed yet could not quite experience, a rough grasping toward language that is willing for the inelegant if it serves the passion of her impulse in the moment. Also present here is the Tsvetaeva who who encourages the poem to carry her off on its wild galloping back. The wonder is how she revisits the enigma of her life situations in the poems and extends this wildness line by line, verse by verse, bringing that untamed quality forward as a virtue. How much we would have lost had Tsvetaeva not formed this incremental way of working backward and forward at the same time. This process, visible to me in these translations, certified and extended her power as we follow her, reassessing and adding like boxcars the next installment of her emotional but galvanized offering. Unlike what I sense about Akhmatova, I never feel Tsvetaeva towering apart from me. She's always a woman loving like a woman, heedless and remorselessly, full of savouring and overreach, but haughty too, and in the plenitude of her beauty, both physical and spiritual. Because of that very face-to-face quality, that open admission of love given in a holy register, yet human too in its loss and sorrow, we all the more accompany her. There is something swashbuckling and Joan of Arc-ish, something dashing in her when one has more of the punctuation as she used it given in this translation. The plenitude of dashes and exclamations are important musical scorings for her, and rendered closely here. Perhaps one can say these translations excel in not being too smoothed out with housekeeping that could subdue the spirit in Tsvetaeva's case. We need both kinds of translations, of course, those that let a writer wear fully the stature of the English she might have given us had she written in English, but also a translation such as this one, which allows us the sometimes ragged and see-through of English as a cracked vessel which can't quite carry, but miraculously does carry, this most venturing, most high-stakes Russian spender of the heart's meaty core, Marina Tsvetaeva. So that's Gallagher writing in 2014 about this translation. I'm going to come back to this translation later. I think I'll read perhaps one of the poema. I hope I'm getting the pronunciation for that right. But anyway, I'll try to read one of the longer poems during this little talk. I think it might go on, but let's see. What was I going to say? The translators that she's referring to in the introduction, I agree with her. There's something about them that are really good. It's interesting that even though this was published fairly recently, they actually have been translating Tsvetaeva for a long time. In fact, some of the volumes that I'm going to show you are quite old, and as was already mentioned in that other piece, they really started gearing up with the translation in the 80s. And since we're talking about that team, I'll just show you this book. This is Tsvetaeva's final volume of poetry after Russia. I think it's possible that it is a contender for the best poetry collection of the 20th century, in my humble opinion. It's also by the same translators. To my knowledge, it's not been republished, and this book is pretty damn rare now. If you can get your hands on it, I really recommend it, particularly if you have the earlier volume, this Essential Poetry I just was reading from. That team is really good, and I'll read from this volume later. There's loads of other translators. I'm going to get into them now, but I'll just show you the pile of other books that I've got, and then we'll get on with some readings. So those two books, how do I fit these in? Are by the same team. I think the Russian translator is actually passed away now, which is a damn shame. I don't know how much of Tsvetaeva they had translated together. I'm hoping it's more than just the content of these two volumes, but I'd have to research that more. That desperately needs a new publishing, a new print. Okay, we'll come back to those later. All right, it's a job, but here we go. I'm including the ones I've already got. This is my pile of Tsvetaeva translations. There's a few other things knocking about the house, but essentially these are the texts I'm going to kind of flit through today, very briefly. It's a massive number of things, but I'm just going to try to keep this talk down to 2 hours at the most, and I'm just going to try to go through chronologically some of these books and tell you, in what ways they're worth purchasing or not. Okay, so you're already familiar with that one. That's the Nina Kosman, the artist volume. That's the lyric and the poema. I'll leave the prose for a second. Christopher White. This is Archipelago Books put out this a few years ago. Christopher White is I would say, the main British translator of Tsvetaeva on my radar at the moment. There's a lot of American translators, less so. I don't know if Feinstein's still publishing translations, but he is also publishing with Shearsman Books, and he's got a volume of Tsvetaeva's youthful poems, the really early stuff, coming out in September, I think. But I'll refer back to that stuff in a little while. Moscow in the Plague Year. Tsvetaeva kind of... No, hold on. I'll refer to another book first. She starts with this, really. Milestones is the first big collection. And this book came out in the 19-teens, 1915 possibly. It's before the Bolshevik Revolution. There are poems to Alexander Blok in here and things like that. The title is a bit odd, Milestones. I think the Russian was versti, vests in English, which is just the distance marker verst, as in the Russian corollary to mile or kilometer. I think they should have just kept the Russian, because most people know that, don't they? It's not too much of a tricky one. Anyway, sometimes translated as milestones, sometimes translated as mileposts, because of the markers on country roads in Russia, things like that. This is Robin Kemble, his translation on an American publisher. Is it Northwestern? Yeah, Northwestern. They also have translations from people like Rilke and stuff like that. I'll come back to Robin Kemble, but the reason I pull that up right now is just to give you a timeline. So she really hits gold with that one. I think that's a really good collection of poetry. Not sure if it's the best translation. I couldn't tell really, but I mean, just from reading them as poems, it's a good book. I definitely recommend it. So Moscow in the Plague Year kind of follows up. Once she's done that one, these are the poems that are coming in as the Bolshevik Revolution hits in 1917, is it? This book is really good as well, because some of the content is really established for readers of Tsvetaeva now. Like a lot of the popular lyrics hit home. She starts doing that in the late teens and into the early 20s. But the wonderful thing about this book is that he's really tried to collect up everything from that period, the stuff that wasn't translated, that goes through into the early 20s, and her life is incredibly tragic at that time. I won't go into too much of the biography, but that is a really great book. It's quite thick for a poetry volume. It's like 260 pages. Yeah, it's really good, and it kind of introduced me to Christopher White's translations. I'm going to come back to Christopher White because, like I say, he is publishing with Shearsman now on other books. I think he's trying to get through all of the Tsvetaeva. He also has a translation of Milestones, which I own but not at this location now. Shearsman have also put out Christopher White's version of this book, this collection. I've read it, it's really good. It's as good as this, so it's up to you. That's sometimes a cultural issue with translations. If you're British, you tend to get more people aiming for rhyme and stuff like that. The Americans don't bother too much, and we kind of stick with our own culturally, I feel sometimes. That might be just a contentious question, I don't know. I think Campbell could be British. I don't know if it's important right now, but anyway, there are two available translations. That's my point. That's one of them. Very good. And another, if you get into the famous poems like the essential poetry, I'd say that would be your next volume, possibly. Milestones. So that's those two. Very important. Some of these, you're going to look at them and say, well, I like this Tsvetaeva lady, but where can I get these bloody books you're showing me? And this is one example of that, because it's very rare. It's Nina Kosman again. I think initially, when was this published? 89. She's publishing the lyrics, the famous Tsvetaeva lyrics from the early 20s usually. I'll look in here, late teens, early 20s. It's really good. I'm not as convinced by Kosman's translations of the longer poems. I'd have to go back to them to really do an analysis. You'd have trouble getting hold of it, but it's a really good book. Very rare though. I think what she must have done, Kosman, was she started with the lyrics, and then she published a paperback 10 years later with the poema included. So there's an overlap between that orange volume I showed you and the one I just put on the camera. All right, trying to give some sense of linear development with Tsvetaeva. This volume is another rare one, and it's a Campbell translation from 1980. It's possibly, is it the earliest volume of Tsvetaeva in English of a single collection? Possibly. It's really good. It has its problems, but in some ways it's almost my favourite. In other ways it's very weird. I don't want to comment on it too much, because even if you could get hold of it, there wouldn't be many of them around. There's not much analysis of this book. It's brilliant. The title in this volume is The Demesne of the Swans, sometimes translated as Swans Encampment. I think both of those translations for that title are a little awkward to me, and there is, with all Tsvetaeva translations, to be honest, how the words work in English, there's always some kind of argument, there's particularly with the titles or the main images that she has, or phrases that she uses. There's always like massive, disagreements and stuff. I love this book. It's really cool. Again, it's got that stuff from the Bolshevik Revolution. I'm going to read some stuff from it probably later. What else? I like my pictures of poets. That's my go-to picture of this poet. I like the kind of Christian Orthodox iconography and all that kind of malarkey. I'll come back to that. That's a very early Tsvetaeva volume. It's not even got the title on the spine, and I don't have a dust cover for it. Swans Encampment, by the way, comes out the same time period as that Christopher White translation, early 20s, I think. What next? This is another British translation. David Macduff. Macduff has translated Dostoevsky and probably some other writers. I don't know if it says. This is an early selected, I think it's from the 90s. It includes a lot of, well, with the selected poetry volumes of Tsvetaeva, you tend to get those early 1920s ones as the mainspring, and then the longer poems. Yeah, 1991, and that's Bloodaxe Books. So that could well be, along with the Feinstein, another option for kind of when British people started becoming aware of Tsvetaeva. It's not one of my go-to translations, to be honest. Macduff is an excellent translator of Dostoevsky, I'd say, at least from my own humble knowledge, but he doesn't have much of the poetic fire of Tsvetaeva. But, you know, there you go. It's probably a cheap selected. You might still get it second-hand. I don't think Bloodaxe has reprinted that, but you'll probably find it, I would imagine. Okay, 2 American translations. Okay, so I'll just do a summary of the 4, I think it's 3 or 4 major long poems. So you have a Poem of the End, Poem of the Mountain, Poem of the Air, and then The Ratcatcher. The Ratcatcher is a book in itself, to my knowledge. I'm not sure of its publishing history in Russia, but it's a long poem. And not too well known. If you get selected poetry volumes of Tsvetaeva, this will, obviously, it's too massive to be put into a selected poem, so you often don't get it. So there it is in its own volume, translated by Angela Livingston. I think she's a really good translator also of Tsvetaeva. And this is an awesome poem. It's a difficult poem to read, but it's one of the poems where she's not like super ideological. I mean, if I was going to get back to Mayakovsky, the big difference obviously with Mayakovsky and Tsvetaeva is they're ideologically totally opposed. I mean, Mayakovsky is the poet of the Bolshevik Revolution. He's not into folklore and mythology, you know. Personally, usually that in itself is not a total turn-off for me. My political feelings, say nowadays, would be, I mean, this is content for another video, but I would say they're kind of conservative, centrist, with, you know, elements of ethnostatism or something, and that sounds very right-wing, but it would take a video to explain that. But so my point in saying that is that she has an affiliation with the White Guard. She has an affiliation with the Russian monarchy, with the Tsar. If she pushes the envelope politically, that's where it's coming from, and I'll read some poems that will kind of show you that. The Rat Cat, but equally, she never castigated Mayakovsky for his political beliefs, which is absolutely fascinating. To what extent she would be conscious of, say, Stalin's gulags in the 30s, that's another story. But at least through the 20s, she is living abroad, and she's constantly coming across people who are not communist, Russians who are critical of the communist regime, saying, you know, how can you stand this guy Mayakovsky? But she's always very generous to Mayakovsky. So she has that kind of generosity, that non-partisanship element to her, and I think so do I, hopefully. The reason I say that now is because The Ratcatcher is definitely a critique of the communist regime. But it's veiled in the sense that it's coming through the legend of the Pied Piper of Hamelin. The assumption being that Stalin or Lenin, I don't know when this comes out, it's not too important, but we have a tyrant leader or somebody who's cast a magic spell on a township and he leads them all to their death. And so that's the metaphorical connection. Do you need to know about Russian politics to enjoy this? Possibly, possibly not. It's just a fascinating long poem, and and it's not how you would ever imagine a long poem to be in English either. So that's kudos to Livingston's translation, maybe, because it's so disjointed and jumpy, and every word has a stamp on it. You know what I mean? It's not the easiest thing to read if you're coming to Tsvetaeva for the first time. But if you're getting into her and you wanna read the longer stuff, that's great. Difficult to find. It's not too easy to find this one. It's Northwestern again. Came out at the end of the 90s. That's why it's difficult to find. It's probably out of print by now. But it's really good. On the same theme, Livingston also has translated Tsvetaeva's play, Phaedra, along with the 3 long poems that I just mentioned. No, sorry, I think I made some errors here. She's got the long poems. There's New Year's Letter, Poem of the Air, and Attempt at a Room. So I missed out 2 of those. She's got Poem of the Air. I guess the aim of this is because Poem of the End and Poem of the Mountain have already been translated a number of times. She's trying to collect up the other longer poems, which I failed to mention. 2012, London publisher, Angel Books. Yeah, that's not. That's for the aficionado of Tsvetaeva, possibly, because you've got to have a grounding in the more well-known longer poems and the lyrics. But it's really good because we don't have a lot of her plays in English still, and Phaedra is one of them. And on the theme of the plays, I'll show this one. There is another volume of plays. Tsvetaeva named her daughter Ariadna after the Greek myth Ariadne, and this is another translation of Phaedra and Ariadne. I am familiar with Greek plays, but I don't know if Ariadne is a straight translation. I suspect it isn't. It's probably been Tsvetaevatized or something. But this is something I've not looked at in totem yet. It's a little bit rare, and again, that's just for people who are building up a collection, not something you need to bother with, possibly, if you're trying to read into her to start with. Soul and Passion, 2 classical plays, 2012. Tiny publisher, maybe. Tricky to get hold of, possibly. But they've done a good job with that. Don't know the translators very well. Don't know if they've translated beyond this book. In Tsvetaeva, it's another team, but I won't go into it. You can look it up if you're interested. All right, let's get rid of some of these. Okay, last but not least, let's go back to this briefly. That's After Russia, the thing that I showed you earlier, and that's what I favour as the best translation, or as a contender for the best. But having said that, these have just come out. Christopher White has done After Russia, but he's done it in 2 sections because Tsvetaeva wrote the collection out in 2 notebooks, and he's gone back to the notebooks and possibly for monetary reasons, or possibly just I don't know, for whatever reasons. They're in 2 volumes anyway. First notebook, second notebook. What can you do? I mean, in a realm like this, there's not many people publishing Tsveteva anyway. This could be the equal to the book I've already showed you, this one here. But it's easily available, and I would definitely say that's the best collection Tsveteva ever wrote. It's not the easiest collection to read, so that would be your go-to publisher, Shearsman, probably, for this book at the moment. I'll do some readings from it later. I mean, I could get into detail and just do a comparison between the 2 approaches on that book from those 2 different translators, the team and White. I don't know if that's worth doing, but it's a great collection. What can you do? Those are the translations that I have. Some of the poems from After Russia obviously enter selected poems as well, so you'll find some of the After Russia poems in the selected poems. Where am I going to start? Oh, last but not least, the prose. Very, very quickly, because we've got so many books here. Blood Axe put out this book. It's called Art in the Light of Conscience. It's probably out of print. I don't know. One of the greatest collections of a poet's prose ever. Possibly one of the best books Blood Axe has ever published. Came out in the 90s. If you want her prose, she's a brilliant prose essayist and memoirist. Translated by Angela Livingston again. Awesome book, but probably difficult to get hold of. If you're interested in her prose, get that. If you've already familiarized yourself with the poetry. There are lots of essays in there. The Poet and Time. I mean, the price of the book, just for that one essay alone, is worth getting hold of. There's a number of poems here translated by Livingston as well for some reason. Poet on the Critic, brilliant. There's loads of good essays in there. Awesome. I won't go into it. Art in the Light of Conscience. The other one is the memoir type things. This is called, it's not very well placed, is it? A Captive Spirit. It's been published in the US and in Britain. It's one of the main collections of a prose now, quite well known. Yeah, Ardis put it out initially, I think, but now it's been taken up by a couple of other publishers, I think. That's for the memoirs. If you're into Russian history, it's a bit more useful, or you want to see the culture through the eyes of a poet who's obviously perpetually referring to fellow poets and poetry. That's a really good book. It's awesome. She writes really effectively and emotionally about her family and the environment that she grew up in. I'd love to go back and read that, but there's only so much time. It's awesome. Very good. When did it come out? 90s, possibly? 80. No, 80 on Ardis. Is that the Ardis? No, it's the reprint by Virago. Last but not least, something you'll never find, probably. The original Russian collected poems. Just so you can see it. I don't know how they've updated the collected poems nowadays. This is one of 2 volumes, actually. The other one I've left in Korea. They have the collected poem plays and prose in the other one. So if you read Russian, you want something like that, I would imagine. But there's probably been something updated by now. This is like 80s, I think. 84. It was an obscure book, and I found it for like $20 and was lucky enough to get it through an American book website. I don't read Russian, but I used to be able to read to the extent that I could sound out the words but I've forgotten. I went to Russia. I went to Russia years ago, so the book is too dense for me to get back into learning Russian with. But there you go. Yeah, I did have a smattering of Russian just for travel, but not good enough for anything else. Where do I begin with my readings? Okay, so we're gonna spend another hour possibly on readings and summary. So I'm gonna try to make it linear, just as I showed you those books. I'll try to give the readings in a vaguely similar fashion. Back to this one. I don't. Like I said, I'd love to get the other volume of translations for Milestones, but this one we'll have to do for now. It's on Shearsman, by the way. Shearsman are going to put out youthful poems, and after that, it's called Youthful Poems, but it's like an early collection called, I think it's called Magic Lantern. It's very kind of girlish. She's still in her mid-teens. Like, this is the first big collection, and she's still fairly young. I don't even know if she's hit her 20s for this. I really like it. It's very charming and just full of energy. There's a lot of sequences with Tsvetaeva, numbered sequences. Here's the beginning of the book. One. Oh, hold on. I think the whole book is a sequence of some kind. Yeah. I unbolted an iron casket, took a sorrowful gift from out it, with a large pearl set in, a small ring with a large pearl set in. Stole like a cat to the entrance steps, bared to the wind my face and lips. Winds were wailing, birds were sailing, swans to the left, to the right of us, ravens. Our own ways, parting in two directions. With the first few clouds you'll leave on your wanderings, through dense grown forests, your path meandering among scorching sand dunes. Your soul you'll shriek out, your eyes you'll weep out, and over me the owl to cry, and over me the grass to sigh. It's interesting because there's some kind of prophetic element, in the early poems. I find this even with my own work and other poets' work, is they predict what's going to happen in the life of the poem before even the poet is aware of it. It's almost like the poem creates its own little time zone, its own little synchronistic, fateful arena, or something of that nature. 4. There's nothing anyone's plundered. I'm happy we've parted thus. I kiss you across the hundreds of versts that separate us. I know our gifts are divergent. My voice for the first time still. What's my verse to you, young Tsveteva, undisciplined and undrilled? On the fearful flight you're beginning, I bless you, young eaglet, fly. You've borne the sun without flinching. Is it irksome, my youthful eye? None ever gave you more tender, more irrevocable last glance. I kiss you across the hundreds of years that separate us. I don't want to hurry these poems too much. I feel like there's a lot to get through, but I also want to kind of just keep my own pace. 10 from the same sequence. Doves sailing onwards, silvery, bewildered, in the still of the evening, my motherly blessing be on you, my pitiful raven chick. Of blackish blue, bluish, black as your plumage, crisp, covetous, colourful hue. There were 2 others of that same hue, burned out with blue lightning, Lermontov, Bonaparte. I've set you free to the heavens. Fly with you, fly, little one, submissively, blissfully, doves sailing onwards, silvery, silvery, above you. They are covering my front doorway, the shadows of doves, full swarming. How many past palpitations, protestations. I go out on the porch, it's blowing. I lift up my face, it's glowing, but the heart is no more soulful, nor doleful. I stand on the step, the top one, the branches swaying above one. Soon the cupola on that church height will fade from sight. With clouds it comes sailing, Eastertide. With chimes it comes sailing, Eastertide. The first time a man was crucified, at Eastertide. Can you tell if the translator is American, North American or English? I know he's English. Why? Because the rhyme is like kicked in. I might be wrong, but it's been a while since I've come back to this volume. He lives in Switzerland. We don't know where he's from, but he lives in Switzerland. Robin Kemble, this is, by the way. Eve of the Annunciation. The cathedral of the Annunciation is shining beautifully. Above the grand cupola, under the sickle moon, a star that reminds me of Constantinople. Round the grey parvis, a group of old women beg for almsgiving in strident voices, like large pearls gleaming. Lamps are burning round the Holy Virgin. Aglow with black insomnia, the saints' faces shine. Inside the black cupola, ice covers the window cases. Like a golden bush, like a family tree, it dangles there, the huge chandelier. Blessed is the fruit of thy womb, merciful Virgin. It has journeyed from hand to hand, the flame. It has journeyed from mouth to mouth, the name, Holy Virgin. Radiant with heat, the candle is lit. Lost in the shadows there, I too turn to the Sun Mother, offer her joyfully my prayer. Mother of mothers, preserve and guide my blue-eyed daughter. Instruct her in enlightened wisdom, conduct her upon the lost path of blessedness. Grant her health, at her pillow head installed the angel since fled from me. Keep her from pompous wordiness, lest she become like me, a predatress a sorceress. The service is over. The sky is cloudless. Crossing themselves with fervour, the people go on their way. Some to their homes, and those with nowhere. Go, God knows where. All, God knows where. A group of peasant women, grey and old, linger by the entrance, crossing themselves several-fold, before that limpid blaze, before the candles raise. As for me, I merrily, as through unsteady waves, thrust my way through the crowd. I run down to the river Moskva to watch the ice flow there. So we're now in 1916. Her daughter is born. I think she loses 2 children, but this will become apparent because she writes some more poems about that, if I can find them. I'll just read a couple more from this collection because we don't have too much time. 33. Eat, drink, and be merry, my soul. But there'll come a day, lay me then in the wold at the 4 crossways, there where wolves and carrion crows stalk the bare-steppe grass. There stand over me, finger-post for my burial cross. I never once eschewed of night places of ill fame. Tower high above me, firm, upright, cross without a name. Not one amongst you, friends, with me ate or drank their fill. Weeds and wild grass cover me where my head lies still. Light no candle unto me in the chapel gloom. I wish no eternal memory in my native tomb. Okay, it's important to read some poems to Blok. She's in this collection. She's writing poems to Akhmatova and to Blok, so it's worth reading some of those. So, poems to Blok. This is the 5th poem of that sequence. Where I live in my Moscow, cupolas shine. Where I live in my Moscow, church bells chime, and tombs where I live stand all in a line, and tsarinas sleep in them, and tsars. And you don't know, in the Kremlin at dawn the air's lighter than anywhere under the sun. And you don't know, in the Kremlin at dawn, I pray to you unto dusk. And you pass by over your Neva at the time I stand by the river Moskva with my head bowed low, and there afar the street lamps drowse in the dusk. With all my insomnia I love you. With all my insomnia I heed you at the time in the whole of the Kremlin too, when the sextons wake to their task. But that river of mine with that river of yours, but that hand of mine with that hand of yours will not be joined, my joy, before the dawn catches up with the dusk. I don't know. I'm going to go back to the first one. Sorry, I'm skipping around in this sequence, but the first one I read yesterday, and it might be a good one to read. Your name, a bird cupped in the palm. Your name, a sliver of ice on the tongue. One single movement of the lips. Your name, 5 letters, simply this. A ball in flight snapped up in its path, a silver tinkling bell in the mouth. A stone cast into a placid pond echoes your name with its sobbing sound. In the light clatter of nighttime hooves, your wondrous name comes thundering through. And against our temples it may knock with the vibrant snap of a rifle cock. Your name, there's no wise. Your name, a kiss placed on the eyes, on the tender frost of lids fast closed. Your name, a kiss placed on the snows, a sky blue gulp from an ice-cold stream. With your names, to be locked in deepest dream. Some of the phrasing seems troublesome, or perhaps it's just the way I'm reading. Okay, one more maybe from this, and then I'll get on to another book. Seven, from the same sequence to Blok. You, ravisher of the pall, from catafalques and from cradles, agitator of winds and squalls, instigator of snow tornadoes, of fevers, verses and wars, necromancer you, slave driver, I have heard the menacing roar of lions sensing the chariot's arrival. I hear passionate voices call, and one that stays mute and stubborn. I see crimson sails offshore, and one that is black among them. Whether born on ocean or air, wherever your journey passes, I wait joyfully, breast full bared to the sun, as to mortal justice. Okay, enough of that. That's the book. I'm not going to read from every book I showed you, trust me. So, the Christopher Wright translations are very interesting. They cover a lot of ground, so it's quite tricky to give you a good picture of the whole book. So, Milestones comes out in 1916, I think. Bolshevik Revolution kicks in. Tsvetaeva is living in tremendous poverty, as she did through most of her life. And the poems in this book cover the years 1918. I can't remember what we've got here. It's kind of the it's midway through 1920, so 2 years, but she's really very productive during this time, even though the political situation is a nightmare. Most of these poems aren't titled, by the way. The world will end with a deluge. The world will end with a fire. At midnight, daughter and mother disputing like water and fire. The Holy Ghost, a pigeon by a lake, a little white dove perching on a branch. No, more a tongue of flame above a light brown head, and a fire in the throat. Songs should be sung the way a man is loved, joyously, with all one's energy. What does it matter if they are forgotten? God's the one I'm singing for, not people. Songs should be sung the way the heart keeps beating. Singing is life. I'm not introducing them, there's nothing to introduce, they don't have titles. Accept my thanks, O Lord, for ocean, for dry land, enchantments of the flesh, the spirit that won't die, for this fire in the blood, water that brings refreshment. Accept my thanks for love, and for the weather too. These are all coming into late 1918. This is from November. Withholding all the rest, the god of song made me the gift of a nightingale's throat. A nightingale's throat. Warble on, nightingale passion of mine. I strain all my throat's strings until they snap. If I entered the world a nightingale, it wasn't so I could preserve my throat. This is titled, from March 1919, to P. Antokolsky. This ring of iron I bestow on you confers insomnia, rapture, and despair. You will no longer look girls in the face, forgetting what the word tenderness means. The head you lift amidst its maddening curls will be a goblet brimming over, while on your hand this iron ornament will turn you back to coal, ashes, and dust. When love itself, become a burning coal, nestles against your head's prophetic curls, say not a word, just press this iron ring upon its sunburnt finger to your lips. A talisman against which reddening mouths are powerless, first link in your chain mail, so that an oak tree in the storm of days you'll stand alone, God in his iron ring. Strange thought just came to me. Is there something of Morrissey in this? It's kind of the more you ignore me, the closer I get. This one, strange connection, possibly. This is we're in summer 1919 now. You won't succeed in driving me away. Nobody's able to push spring aside. You wouldn't dare so much as lay a finger on me. My lullabies are far too tender. You won't succeed in giving me a bad name, for my name is water to the lips. Nor will you succeed in leaving me. The door stands open. Your house is deserted. October 1919. God, I'm alive. That means you aren't dead yet. God, you and I can set up an alliance. You, though, are a grumpy old man, and I'm a herald with his trumpet. God, you can sleep at night in your blue heavens. But as for me, among the living, rely on me. My forehead meets the psalms. I am your army's drummer boy. I blow your trumpet. I give out the evening signal and the dawn reveille. The love I feel for you is not a daughter's but a son's. Flames cannot harm my soldier's tent. Look at it. It could be the burning bush. I wouldn't change my duties for a seraph's. I'm God's own volunteer. It's got that, again, there's that kind of soldierishness, monarchical sense to some of them. She's kind of got that folklore. She definitely germinates the kind of monarchic line with the folklore and the mythology. So it's and God and the Orthodox God as well of the Russian people. Should I keep plowing ahead with this? There are some great poems in here. Easter Monday 1920. That's not a title, that's just the dating of it. It's titleless. 2 hands, each lowered gently onto a young child's head. I was given 2 of them, one beneath each hand. Using both, clenched tight and fiercely as I could, I snatched the older from the dark, but lost the younger one. 2 hands to fondle and caress those fluffy, tender heads. 2 hands. Within a single night I had no use for one. Bright upon its slender neck, a dandelion stalk. It's still impossible to grasp. My child lies in the earth. Her younger daughter died very young, 3, I think. There are poems for the birth of that child and the death. And then she also had another child die of starvation. Half of the window has been opened. Half of the soul has been revealed. Why not open the other half too? The remainder of the window? Well, I still can't center that properly. It's a good book. I'm going to give you some Robin Kemble from the more obscure book. This covers the same timeline, really. I'll try to find the more shouty ideological poems. There aren't really that many. She's quite elusive. She's not as explicit as Mayakovsky, really. This is from a sequence called The Don, named after the River Don in Moscow. I think it's in Moscow. She's a Muscovite poet after all. This is the second poem from that sequence. Like I say, these are the Kemble translations. Those spared will die. Those fallen rise from under. Then come the sons, remembering days far gone. And where were you? The words will roll like thunder. The answer roll like thunder. On the Don. What did you do? We bore with grief and cruelty, then laid us down to sleep, our last strength gone. And in the dictionary over duty, the grandsons looking back will write the Don. Moi lubimia, she writes. She's writing notes on her previous collections and keeping them so that some of the manuscripts we actually have her looking back on her own poems. Moi lubimia, if I'm getting it right, means my favorite. So I had to read that one, didn't I? I don't know where I got that from because that's my note, so I must have gotten that from somewhere else. From the same sequence, 26. It is simple as blood and sweat, Tsar and people, in destiny wed. It is clear as a secret shared between two, and the spirit the third. Heaven summoned the Tsar to his throne. It is spotless as sleep and snow. And the Tsar shall regain his throne yet. It is sacred as blood and sweat. She writes a note after that. 24th of April 1918, third day of Easter, and he had less than 3 months to live. She's looking back and realizing she's written a poem about the Tsar, not knowing that he was in grave danger of death. '34 from the same collection. I think the thing that the reason why this collection is not well known is because it's got some really Tsarist poems in it, and that's not cool nowadays. You know why? Because we're in a proto-communist situation in Europe. That's why. So nationalism, loyalty to the Tsar is the last thing we want to talk about. So if these poems did get reprinted, that would be very interesting and would be very much against the political grain of our sadly shrunken ideological times. 34 from the same sequence. Gallant white legions, Gordian knot of prowess named Russian. Gallant white legions, white mushrooms out of songs that are Russian. Gallant white legions, white stars that steep, indefaceable, span the skies. Gallant white legions, black nails thrust deep in the ribs of the Antichrist. This is a really good book, actually. I think Robin Campbell's best translations are actually contained in this book. I don't know. I'm assuming he's still around, and it would be great to have a newer reprint of this. 35 from the same sequence, I think. Better, my lyre, to confess it freely. It was the great ever stirred in our feelings. Masts, battle ensigns, churches and kings, bards, epic heroes, eagles and elders. Those that are pledged to the realm like soldiers do not confide their tent to the winds. You know the Tsar, do not toy with the hunter. Loyalty has held us, firm as an anchor. Loyalty to greatness, to guilt, to grief, to the great crowned guilt, loyalty unswerving. Those that are pledged to the Khan will serve him. Their oath is not to the horde, but its chief. We struck a fickle age, lyre, that scatters all to the winds, uniforms ripped to tatters, and the last shreds of the tent worn thin. New crowds collecting, other flags waving. but we still stand by our word, unwavering. For they are devious captains, the winds. I'm going to leave it at that. I mean, if I had a publisher, I would even republish that myself with the translator's permission, or make an arrangement. It's a great book. In some ways, it's my favourite, but in a very obscure way, because I still find some of the phrasing a little bit stilted, but it's very direct. Okay, so a few more. I'm not going to read The Ratcatcher, so you have to have a look into that if you can find it. But if anybody wants me to read it, I mean, I could do a separate video, but otherwise, no. It really needs to be read as a whole, and I don't have the time for that. So these are Nina Kosman's lyric versions of Tsvetaeva. We might be moving back in time a little bit. I'm not going to read too many. Good book. I think some of these are available in the Orange Artist book, so you don't have to hunt out this book necessarily. I don't know how these poems have been numbered. It's 21 in this volume. It's called Poems. It's titled using the first line, so it's called Poems Grow Like Stars. Poems grow like stars and like roses, like beauty not meant for home. And to the wreaths and the apotheosis, the same answer. Where are they from? We sleep, and then as through the cobbles the heavens guessed and its 4 petals bloom. Sorry, that's shit. Let me read this poem again. I don't want to mess it up. It's one of my favourite Tsvetaeva pieces. Poems grow like stars. Poems grow like stars and like roses, like beauty not meant for home. And to the wreaths and the apotheosis the same answer. Where are they from? We sleep, and then, as through the cobbles, the heavens guessed and its 4 petals loom. O world, take note! A sleeping bard discovers the law of star, the formula of bloom. I've done a crib translation myself. I'll read that just for the hell of it. I like poems about poems. I've added a few words in. This is a very creative translation. Poems grow like stars, like roses, like beauty, the unintended home. And to the wreaths, the apotheoses, a same answer. Where are they from? We sleep, then, as through cobbles, the guest, Inciella, her from petal brim, throngs, O world, hear ye at sleep's rubble, the bard inheres lore of star, precess of bloom. I'm throwing Joyce into a Tsvetaeva translation. 23. The sun is one, but marches through all lands. The sun is mine. I will not share my sun. Not an hour of it, nor a ray, nor a look, never, with no one. Let all cities perish in their perpetual night. I'll cup it in my hands, I'll forbid it to circle. Never mind if I burn my hands, my lips, and my heart. Should it vanish in eternal darkness, I'll stalk its tracks. My son, I will not share you with anyone. There's only one more I want to read, and I do know which one. There's another poem called God, which is really good as well. Possibly two more. Can't find anything. Hold on. Yeah, this one. It's quite a famous poem. I think Macduff has definitely translated it. A couple more, and then I'll just finish up with the After Russia translations. This is called Nailed to the Pillory. It's in two parts. 1. Nailed to the pillory of shame of the ancient conscience of the Slavs, snake in my heart, stigma on my brow, I still maintain that I am innocent. I still insist that I share the peace of the pious receiving the Eucharist, that it is not my fault my hand is held out in the streets for happiness. Sort out all this trash. Tell me, or am I blind, where is my gold or my silver? There are only ashes in my hand. And this is all, with flattery and prayer, I have received from those who are so happy. And this is all that I will carry into the land of silent kisses. Two. Nailed to the pillory, I will still say that I love you. That in her womb thoughts no mother could look at her child as fondly. That, as you keep busy, I would not want just to be dying, but to die for you. You will not understand. My words are feeble. That the pillory is too feeble a rack. That, had troops entrusted me with their flag, were you to appear with the flag of the foe, my hand numb as the pillory would at once let go their flag. So, having trampled my highest honour under your feet, lower than the grass, nailed to the pillory by your very hand, here I stand, a birch, alone in a field. This pillory, my obelisk, this murmur, not the crowd, but the pigeons, cooing in the early sun. Having given everything, I will not trade this black pillory, not even for the red halo of Rouen. That's the Joan of Arc reference earlier, right? I would guess. The Sibyl, a little bit later, we're in 1922 now. The Sibyl, burnt out. The Sibyl, charred. All the birds are dead, but God is alive. The Sibyl, emptied out. The Sibyl, a drought. All veins have withered. The jealous groom. The Sibyl, dropped out. The Sibyl, the crater of fate and destruction, the tree among maids. Like a regal tree in the naked woods, at first the fire howled just like a tree. Then, from under its lids, taking off unaware, like rivers gone dry, the god took flight. He sensed the waste of an outside search, and his voice and his heart fell into me. The Sibyl, the oracle, the Sibyl, the vault. Thus Annunciation came true in that exact, unaging hour. Thus, in grey-haired grass, her mortal maidenhood became the cave for the marvellous voice. Thus, becoming a star-storm, the Sibyl dropped out of life. There's so much to go through. It's really good. I can't go any longer with that. Nina Kosman is very good as well. Alright, last but not least, I'm going to leave it's a shame because I'm also going to leave the Livingston as well, but I really do recommend those translations. After Russia is worthwhile getting into. Something happens between that great period of production in the early 20s and then kind of slackens off a little, but the poems of After Russia are released a lot later, I think. I should check. They start in 22, so they kind of follow up on the Christopher White Moscow in the Plague Year. But well, you know, it's a classic case of a poetry collection that just disappears, really. Nobody really reads it. Tsvetaeva was in Czechoslovakia for a while, and then in Paris and France. I know she was moving around a little. I don't have a date for the first published version of this in Russia. Hold on, it's worthwhile knowing, you know. I think it comes out in it's either the late 20s or the early 30s, and then there's not much going on in terms of poetry production after that. She just turns to prose. I think maybe the not being in Russia for so long is like drained her of poetry in some sense. But you know, there's the drainedness and the exhaustion of the thing, but it's actually not that, because the energy of the poems is heightened to an almost unbearable kind of degree. It's like she's taken the wit and the elements of hysteria and schizophrenia and jumpiness, and she's just used that as an entire mode unto itself, really. Okay, like I said, this is split into two parts. Actually, I still have all the notes from the previous owner of this book in here. They're rather charming scribbles. She's interested in, you know, she's quite an affirmative poet, you know. She's a bit like Whitman in the sense that she's interested in what's going on. Like, Poem of the Air is very much like, you know, when the beginning of airplane travel. And then she's got this poem called Wires, which I'm going to read from, which is obviously the telegraph, which is, I would assume it's becoming, you know, more established in Russia, or in Europe maybe, in the 20s. Wires. Where are we now? I think we're in 1922. This is a long one. I'm just going to read sections from it. 1. In a row of singing pillars supporting the Empyrean, I send to you my share of the dale dust. Along the alley of sighs with a wire to a pole, a telegraphic I love. I plead, a printed blank won't fit it. It is simpler with wires. These are pillars. On them Atlas lowered a racetrack of Olympian gods. Along the pillars, a telegraphic that well. Do you hear? This is the last breakdown of a torn-off throat. Well. These are riggings above a sea of fields, the quiet Atlantic path. Higher, higher, and we merged in Ariadne's return. Turn around. The melancholy of charity hospitals. I won't get out. In the farewells of steel wires are the voices of Hades, moving away, conjuring the distance. Pity. Pity me? In this chorus will you notice it? In the death rattle of obstinate passions is the breath of Eurydice. Through mounds and ditches, Eurydice's alas. Don't leave. Two. Just to kind of explain, she cuts words with dashes, so that's where you get all those pauses. She's actually using that as a technique. It was used earlier, but now it's like a major kind of function. 2. I want to tell you, well, no, squeezed into lines and rhymes, the heart is more spacious. I fear there is not enough for such misfortune in all of Racine and all of Shakespeare. Everyone sobbed, and if blood hurt, everyone sobbed, and if snakes are in the roses. For Phaedra, there was only Hippolytus. Ariadne's lament is for Theseus alone. Torment, neither shores nor boys. Yes, for I affirm, lost in the count, that in you I lose everyone, who did not exist sometime and somewhere. What hopes, when infused throughout with you, all the air got used to you, since my own bones are like Naxos, since my own blood beneath the skin is like the Styx. Futility, it is in me, everywhere. Having closed my eyes, it is bottomless, dayless, and the calendar date lies. Just as you are, a breakup, so am I not Ariadne, and not a loss. Oh, along which seas and cities to search for you, invisible one, sought by a blind woman. I entrust my farewells to the wires, and leaning against a telegraph pole, I cry. Too much from that sequence to go on with it, but it's excellent. This is a poem called Poets. 1. The poet begins his speech in a roundabout way. Speech takes the poet far. With planets, omens, the ruts of roundabout parables, between yes and no, he conjures a detour, swinging his arm from the bell tower, for the path of comets is the path of poets. Scattered links of causality, that is his connection. Your head is up, you will despair. A poet's eclipses are not foretold by the calendar. He is the one who mixes the cards. He is the one who cheats weights and sums. He is the one who asks from his school desk. He is the one who routs Kant. He who is in the stone grave of Bastille is like the tree in its beauty. The one whose tracks always grew cold. The train for which everyone is late. For the path of comets is the poet's path, burning without warming, reaping without sowing, an explosion and a breaking apart. Your path, maned curve, is not foretold by the calendar. 2. In the world there are the superfluous, the additional ones, uninscribed in the horizon. For the unlisted in your reference books, a rubbish heap is home. In the world there are the hollow, the jostled, the dumb, the dung, a nail to rip your silken hem, dirt splashing squeamishly from under your wheels. In the world there are the illusory, the invisible, the omen, specks of leprosariums. In the world there are Jobs who would envy Job if we were not poets, rhymed with pariahs. Once having flooded the shores, we try to win a god from the goddesses and a virgin from the gods. The third part of this is the last part. What should I do, a blind man and stepson, in a world where each has a father and can see, where passions go along anathemas as though along embankments, where lament is called a cold? What should I do, a chorister by my rib and trade, like a wire, scorched, Siberia, in step with my visions as though across a bridge, with their weightlessness in a world of weights? What should I do, a singer and the firstborn, in a world where the blackest is grey, where they keep inspiration in a thermos, with this immeasurability in a world of measures? I'm going quite deep into this book. I want to give Christopher White some chance to translate as well. This is called In Praise of Time. Hold on, have I got this right? I'll read a couple more and then I'll go on to the other translation. The refugee pavement, it whooped and ran off like the headlong rush of wheels. Time, I can't keep up with you. Captured in chronicles and in kisses, but rustling in a small stream of sands. Time, you will deceive me. With clock hands, with ruts of wrinkles, and with America's novelties. The jug is empty. Time, you will give me short measure. Time, you will betray me. Like an unfaithful wife, like a toy you will drop me. Time is short, but it is ours. Your trains are of a different destination. For I was born outside of time. In vain, in futility, you fight against it. A caliph for an hour. Time, I will pass you. This is called Night. The hour of the river's bearing upper reaches, the hour when you gaze into souls as though into eyes. These are the gaping sluices of blood. These are the gaping sluices of night. Blood gushed, imitating night. Blood gushed, imitating blood. Night gushed. The hour of auditory upper reaches, when the world enters the ears as though into eyes. The closed curtain of sight torn away. Clear calm of time. The hour when the ear splits like an eyelid. We no longer have weight. Don't breathe. We hear. The world turned into a single cochlea. A cochlea sucking sounds, an entire soul. The hour when you enter souls as into arms. Too many to read. One more from this book, that's called To Steal Through. And perhaps the best victory over time and gravity is to pass by without leaving a trace, to pass through without leaving a shadow on the walls. Perhaps to seize by renunciation, to efface yourself from mirrors, like Lermontov stealing through the Caucasus without disturbing the cliffs. But might the best amusement be not to touch an organ's echo with the finger of bark? To disintegrate, leaving no ashes for an urn? Perhaps to seize by deception? To strike my name from the latitudes? To steal through time as though through an ocean, without disturbing the waters? It's kind of Keats, what is it? My name is writ in water, without disturbing the waters. Most of those were from the first notebook, so I'm going to leave the first notebook aside with the Christopher White and just deal with the later poems from that book. I haven't marked anything, so this is totally random. Achilles on the rampart. This is the White translations now. Drained white, washed over under a bulldozer, knocked flat. I'll die. Polyxena's first glimpse of Achilles on the rampart. Red, bloody, towering above the flats, bodies he'd felled. She clasped her hands. Who's this? And yet she knew. Stake she'd burn at. She recognized that enchantment, stilled from fear and love. Polyxena, catching sight of her, Achaean, gasped, blood draining from her cheeks like the Atlantic. Know how it feels. No way to master it. Expand. Shocked the blood. Couple from the end of that collection. I think this has been translated attempt at jealousy, but this is White's got it as giving jealousy a go. Giving jealousy a go. So how's life with another woman? Nothing simpler? Strike the oar? Did memories of me recede fast as a disappearing coast, a floating island, but one somewhere in the sky, not on the waves? Souls, souls, if only you could be sisters and nothing more, no sex. How's life next to a woman who's straightforward? No divinities? You abdicated first, then forced that queen to get down off her throne. How's life with you two? Coping well? You're quaking? How is getting up? Able to pay the customs duty on immortal platitude, pauper? Enough of frantic breakups. I'm getting a place of my own. Can you live with just any woman after I had chosen you? Food more digestible, your kind of thing? If it palls, don't complain. How's living with a graven image? An improvement on Mount Sinai? What is life like with an alien? Someone from here? With a mere rib? Can you feel shame lash your forehead like the reins in Zeus's hands? How are your days? Your morning greetings? Managing? The songs you sing? The ulcer of a deathless conscience, able to make your peace with it? How's it with stuff off supermarket shelves? Find the price hard to pay? Used to marble from Carrera, how can you live with plaster trash? Hewed out of clods of earth that God got well and truly smashed to bits, how's it with one who's like a million? Can she match Adam's other wife? Mass-produced novelties begun to lose their charm? Immune to spells, how's life with a sublunar woman? All 5 senses, but no 6th. Time to get to the point. You're happy? Like being in a bottomless pit? Darling, is your life harder now than mine is with another man? That's more of a bitter side of Tsvetaeva. And it's not God as much. Usually she kind of veils it in mythology and stuff, but that's kind of just brute. But it's interesting. The blizzard gets beneath your coat flaps, breakups and schisms everywhere. On the joyous motley scarf, cutting tears of salty brine, pearls that have been coarsely ground. All right, I'm overstaying my welcome, possibly. I don't think I've gotten the best poems out of that book. It's been a while since I've read it, so I'm going to have to go back to it and possibly find the best pieces. Anyway, so that's really all that I have to talk on. In summary, what do I love about Tsvetaeva? She's not really from the world. She's got that Yeatsian quality of only being half here, as it were. It's a spiritual thing. So that when she inhabits an emotion, it can be in almost like a playful way, as if, it's got that sense of like, so this is what it's like to be human. It's like this kind of wit and surprise in the act of emoting or having these great passions that she does have, obviously. So there's an inhabiting of emotion, which is very virile, you could say, but also a distance from the emotion at the same time, which is very interesting. And it's almost mirrored in the disjointedness of the later poems, in a way. I don't know how that works rhythmically. Obviously, it's massively different comparing the way a poem sounds in Russian to the way it sounds in English. I noticed that in the white translations and some of the later translations, the the line breaks are so subjective. The run on lines. We've not gone into the technical aspects of poetry, but there's so many run-on lines in the translations of Tsvetaeva, so many dashes and jumps and leaps, and the music speeds up and slows down, and it's a very complex thing to represent in English. I don't know, I can't imagine wholly how that would, feel reading the thing in the original. For an English speaker, what are the other things to say? Some people have, you've already heard Tess Gallagher talking about looking around for women poets and stuff. There was also a comparison to Dylan Thomas, I've heard. There aren't really many comparisons, to be honest. He's very unique. I can see why they use Thomas as a reference, because there's that sonic musical quality that's very heavy. She's much more frank than Thomas. Thomas is more sounds. He's more into the music than the brute expression, and it kind of reminds you of the late Sylvia Plath, inevitably, that kind of problem, which I've said I'm not really sure about that connection. A little bit more straightforward. A lot of relationship poems. That's actually quite rare in English language poetry. I've always thought that genius and utter mediocrity, there's a very fine line between them, I think. And of course, something like, relationship poems with a woman pissed off about a man leaving her, or a lover leaving her, the same way with the other gender. In a way, those are poems that people feel that they do write when they're in their teens, when they're first experiencing the passions, whatever, emotional turmoil. So there is that very thin line between greatness and mediocrity there, or not mediocrity, but I think I mentioned this in another video, like, not reading enough, not really having awareness of what poetry can do, what language can do in a poetic sense, and just trusting that your outrage will suffice. Not the total feeling itself, the representation in language. That I don't want to get too bogged down in that, but yes, that's definitely in Tsvetaeva. I didn't read any of the big 3 or 4 poems. The poem map, because they're very long. In this other video that I did make of Tsvetaeva before, which I'm not going to upload, I did actually have a go at Poem of the Mountain. Wasn't very successful. I would encourage people, if they want to start I misplaced that book now. Yeah, I still think that one is the good intro, and it's got the Poem of the Mountain in there. I didn't read from this book. I won't go on any more readings because we've gone on long, but yeah, because also you've had examples of some of the poems in here through other books. So and the Naydan and what is it? The 2 guys, Yastremsky approach kind of thing. So yeah, grab hold of that if you don't know Tsvetaeva at all, I would say. But I mean, equally, any of those books that I showed you are useful. I've already mentioned, augmenting that one with a couple of other ones. It's very subjective, as always. If you do like Tsvetaeva, I would try to follow what she has been doing with this series by Christopher White. Like I said, we desperately need the Naydan Yastremsky after Russia. Alright, I don't think there's anything more. The only other thing to say is she's a diarist. She's a poet diarist in a way. That's interesting. You don't get that in English language poetry too much. You don't get that sense of like the diary element in the poem. And of course, the poems are untitled mostly, so they do have a diary quality in that they're just dated and exist in and of themselves. Dickinson, would be your closest link to that, possibly. Another poet I'm probably going to do videos on, or video. Yeah, I'm kind of grabbing at different straws here. I don't have anything beyond that to say. I think she's a great, great, great poet, and she can teach you a lot about how to use mythology and use the existence of mythological characters to the benefit of your own emotional and social needs within language, if that makes sense. It's interesting. I've written a few poems similar to that myself, and it's something that I've learned directly from Tsvetaeva. We've lost myth in the latest poetry a little bit. British poetry of the last 20-30 years. I don't know anybody trading on myth massively. Like, obviously it's there. You've got translations of Homer, you've got Ovid there to a certain extent. A few people retranslating or reinterpreting Ovid. It always will be there, but I like the way that Tsvetaeva uses it. I think it's very unique. Yes, if you've enjoyed this, please like the video and subscribe. Like I say, I'll try to make more. Try to make some more videos soon. The next one will be the British poetry thing, I think. So thanks very much, and I will catch you soon. Bye.